Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either. Today we're off to the most sparsely populated continent in the world.
Let's see. So we're talking about, a murder in Antarctica?
I'm technically correct, but nobody really lives there, so it doesn't count.
It does too count. They've got an ATM. People live there.
I mean, there's no permanent residence. How about this? We're going to a place where there are twice as many kangaroos as there are people.
Oh, the dango ate my baby.
We're not doing that case today.
Okay, so where the women glow and the men plunder?
That's right. We're in New South Wales, a state in southeast Australia. It was founded by the British as a penal colony in 1788. For nearly a century after that, over 160,000 convicts were shipped to Australia from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales in lieu of being given the death penalty. Today, about 20% of Australians are descendants of convicts, including plenty of prominent citizens.
Can't you hear the thunder?
Honestly, I think this place is perfect for you.
You better run, you better take cover.
And this is why we do true crime and not karaoke. But it is home to 21 of the 25 most venomous snakes in the world.
Oh, hell no. I'm out. No. Between that and the freaking emu wars, I think I'll pass.
Yeah, it's fair. Stick to Texas, right? Anyway, today we're not talking about kangaroos or, what'd you say, dingoes?
The dango ate my baby.
Dingoes. Oh my gosh. No. It's more serious than that. Today we are talking about Anita Cobby, who started out life as Anita Lorraine Lynch. And she was born on November 2nd, 1959 in Sydney. Her father, Gary, was a graphic artist and World War II veteran who served in the Royal Australian Navy. Her mom, Grace, was a nurse, and Anita also had a sister named Catherine. She lived with her parents in a modest home in a place called Blacktown. It's a working-class suburb, about 40 kilometers, because remember, we're in Australia, so forget about miles today, west of the heart of Sydney. The Lynch family, by all accounts, seems like just good, salt-of-the-earth people. The girls were good at school. They weren't the type to stay out late or really even to get into any trouble. They loved the beach and outdoors, and there's really nothing to indicate that there were any sort of even like the kind of small issues that seem to plague most families. I mean, these people were just like straight out of a TV show, you know? The family spent most of their spare time together on family outings. They loved music and sports, and they would spend holidays boating together on the nearby, and I'm going to butcher this, so for our friends in Australia who listen, you'll have to let us know how to say this correctly, but the Nepean River, is that how you'd say that?
Got me, man.
Okay. Jessica, let us know how to pronounce that. Anita was a good student and very popular with her classmates at Evans High School in Blacktown. When she was 20, a friend of the family persuaded her to enter a Miss Australia beauty contest to raise money for what was known as the Spastic Center at the time. Now, it's called the Cerebral Palsy Alliance. The Lynch family, they all came together and they worked really hard to sell raffle tickets at local shopping centers and to raise money for this event. And ultimately, they raised about $10,000, and Anita was crowned the Miss Western Suburbs Charity Queen. And if you look at pictures of Anita, you'll see this tall, beautiful young woman with dark curly hair, just a brilliant smile, wide eyes, and her picture would appear in all of the newspapers after this. And she kind of became like an overnight celebrity in that area. But Anita didn't really want the spotlight.
It seems like she could have pursued a glamorous life and modeling or something like that after that pageant success, but that's not what she wanted.
Right. She wanted to help people and really make a difference in the world. So she applied for a position as a trainee nurse at Sydney Hospital. Anita was so good at being a nurse that she was accepted as a sister in the highly specialized field of microsurgery. It was during her time there at Sydney Hospital that Anita met and fell in love with a man named John Cobby. He was a handsome young nursing student there, and John and Anita were basically inseparable. They shared a lot of the same interests in movies and music and the things that young people enjoy, and they ended up studying together all the time. And Anita's parents really liked John, and when the couple got engaged, The Lynches believed that their daughter had made a good choice.
So this is the opposite of the Fockers, because at this time, as a male nurse, he would have been known as a nurse.
Right, and fun fact, today, as that title Sisters persist, as I understand it, somebody not being from or in Australia, but my research on this says that even today, they use that term rather affectionately, and so even the male nurses down there will commonly be referred to as sisters.
No comment.
So Anita and John were married in March of 1982. Over the next 3 years, they traveled extensively. I mean, even like borrowing money, really? Even borrowing money from their family to kind of sustain them while they did these overseas trips. I mean, they came to America. I think they went up to Europe, and they just like had a blast. It was really a great time. They returned to Sydney in 1985, and within a matter of months, their marriage was sort of on the rocks.
Well, what the hell happened there? They're out running around, traveling the world, living the high life, and everything's cool, but then, what, they had to start adulting in the real world, and it got, like, too real?
Yeah, that to me, it seems like that could be part of it, right? You go from all that fun to, reality, and things can be kind of hard. So Anita ended up going back home to live with her parents in Blacktown, and despite their issues, the young couple kept their marital problems really to themselves. They didn't tell anybody else about kind of what was going on and how they had agreed to separate, but it was obvious that they were both really down about the separation. They kept in touch constantly by phone, but they still weren't getting back together just yet. And it wasn't clear if they would at all, but it seems from what I've read that this whole thing, the separation, really bothered John a lot more than it bothered Anita. Anita Cobby now had no trouble getting her old job back at Sydney Hospital. Remember, she was a rock star. And so she just essentially throws herself into work to forget about the troubles in her marriage and what's going on with John. And she would spend most of her time at the hospital, and then when she wasn't working, it would be with the company of her work colleagues and friends. She would work late hours at times, but she just really didn't mind. She really threw herself into her work. So when she did work late, she would head back home. She would call her dad from Blacktown Station, this is like where the train was, to come and pick her up there, to take her to their house. And it didn't matter to Gary if he was in bed asleep, he would still find the time. He would get up, wake up, come get Anita, and make sure he brought her safely home. And it didn't bother him at all. I mean, you could tell this family, like, legit, they just all really loved each other, cared for each other, and got along really, really well. You got any experience with that?
Trains?
Perfect family.
No, hell no.
Trains. Do you have experience with trains you want to talk about?
Perfect family. I mean, I've watched Leave It to Beaver, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of remind me of that a little bit, so that's fair. All right, so fast forward, we get to Sunday, February 2nd, 1986. Anita arrives at work about 7 o'clock in the morning for her shift, and she had some plans with a couple of her friends that she also worked with for dinner that evening. They finished up their shift around 3:30, but they didn't leave the hospital. They actually hung out there and just kind of talked, visited. It sounded like maybe they had some, tea, coffee, whatever, some non-alcoholic beverages at the hospital. Have you ever hung out at work after work? I usually just want to get the heck out of there, but...
When I was a bartender... Yes.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. But, if you worked in a hospital, it was interesting to me that they just kind of hang out there. Because they hang out there for about a couple hours. They end up leaving around 5:15, maybe 5:30. Anita and two of her nursing sisters and friends go to this Lebanese restaurant in a place called Red Fern for an early dinner. So they have dinner, they drink some wine together. Just a really good evening, a great time. Her friends were Lynn Bradshaw and Elaine Bray. And they had actually done their training with Anita and had been friends for all these years. Lynn ended up taking Anita to the nearby railway station and dropping her off there. Interestingly, her friend Lynn woke up in the middle of the night having a nightmare. She was dreaming that she had dropped Anita off, but then when they said their goodbyes, just like it had happened, this part was different. Lynn said, "I'll see you tomorrow," but Anita, instead of saying what she had actually said that day, said, "No, I'm dying, Lynn." And it scared her enough that she got up and checked all the locks and windows in her house.
That's creepy.
Yeah, right. All right. So when Anita didn't call that night, Gary wasn't too concerned because it wasn't unheard of for Anita to get caught late at work or, maybe stay overnight with one of her friends. Remember, she works with these girls these ladies that she's really good friends with. So sometimes, she would spend the night with them. It wasn't a big deal. So Gary really, and this wasn't so unusual that he felt worried. But the next day, when the duty sister from Sydney Hospital called early in the afternoon wondering why Anita hadn't shown up for work, Gary suggested that they try her friends' homes, and this was when he started to be concerned. He was told that her friends were already at work and that they were concerned as well, and now Gary really started to worry. He called his wife, who was at work, and she had heard nothing either, and so Gary started calling all the places that he knew that his daughter could possibly be, but he was unable to find her. And so around dinner time, he went to the police station to report his daughter missing, taking a photograph of her with him. By the following day, the Lynch family was frantic. John had headed over to Anita's parents' house, and along the way, he picked up a bottle of scotch to kind of take the edge off.
And John's the estranged husband?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so John got there, and he means well, but, he's frantic, and he still clearly is in love with Anita and cares about her. And so he kind of starts questioning them about what they've done, and who did they call, and what are you doing, and it kind of comes across a little rough to the family, but, understandable in this kind of situation. Now, John had last spoken to Anita that morning of the 2nd, and he hadn't heard from her since. He had actually asked if she wanted to get together that evening for dinner, but she had those plans to go out with her workmates and friends. So John, after being with the family and talking through all this stuff and having some scotch with the dad, feeling the tension of what's going on there, he decides he's just going to go home, and he heads home and he passes out. All the family could do at this point, having reported to the police, was just wait and pray that Anita would walk through the door. The next day, there is a party scheduled that both John and Anita were supposed to be at. They were actually, he was going to be heading to his sister's beach house, and there was this really exciting thing that, everybody, kind of all the people in their circle, they were all going to be there. So John is on his way there, and he's driving in his car when a news story comes on the radio about a naked body of a young woman that had been discovered.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so he finds a telephone, and he calls Anita's house. And he couldn't even tell who it was. It was either Anita's sister or mother, but one of them said,
"You've got to get back here, John."
And they immediately hung up the phone. So he ran back to his car, and he headed to their house as quickly as he could. Inside were Anita's parents, Anita's sister and her husband, and 2 detectives. Catherine, the sister, said that she can easily remember the moment her family's lives changed forever. She said,
"I can play it like a video in my head. I can remember the detectives walking up the front door, and they had that look on their faces, and they said that they had found, and we knew they had found somebody."
So, on Tuesday, February 4th, 1986, there was a dairy farmer who noticed that his cows were acting strange that morning. The cows, these boiler cows, which I learned more about cows researching this case than I wanted to know. We're not going to go there, but in case you want to know, they're boiler cows. They had all gathered in one spot in this field in the paddock, and he saw it, but it wasn't anything super crazy, so he had an auction he had to get to, so he left. But when he came back, they were still huddled in this odd sort of like they were around something. So he went to go check it out. And when he went down there, that's when he found the naked body of a woman lying face down. He immediately called the police, and they asked him whether he'd seen anything. And his responses were kind of interesting to me. He said that, yeah, as a matter of fact, but 1 or 2 nights before, he had heard screams around 3 o'clock in the morning. He thought it was probably Sunday night, but that he thought it was just kids being kids out on Reen Road, which was the road that his farm was on. And this road was kind of, was out in an area that was sort of a popular teen hangout where teenagers would go and do the sorts of things that teenagers do at night in cars alone on vacant roads. But yeah, so he just kind of brushed it off like it was no big deal. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, hindsight's 20/20, don't they say? I thought you were going to tell me that those cows had gotten hold of John's scotch. Maybe he was drinking with them or something. But
it wasn't that good of news for sure.
Right.
But yeah, so this guy, I guess maybe he was just used to all the noise and craziness, and so it just didn't stand out to him. But unfortunately, in this case, it was not kids being kids. Now, they recovered a wedding ring from the body, and they had taken it to Anita's family, including John, and they asked if they could ID it. And Anita's sister Catherine initially said, "Well, no, this isn't her ring because it's rusty or whatever," and they told her, "No, that's not rust, that's blood."
Oh, wow.
And the family was then able to confirm that they thought that probably was her ring. And they asked John as her husband to ID the body, but he said he couldn't. He just couldn't do it. And so the mom had said she would, but Anita's father, Gary, wouldn't let her. He said he would ID his daughter. And so he went with the police to examine or to be able to identify his daughter. And when they pulled back the sheet, he actually collapsed at what he saw.
Poor dads. Dads are stuck with the worst of things.
Yeah, and so, Bob, do you care to guess who the police initially suspected murdered Anita?
Well, I imagine John. I mean, that'd be a pretty good guess.
Right. So Anita's friend said that John had repeatedly called her. They talked a lot, but that, he called a lot, and he seemed really upset. He was the one that was more bothered by the separation. And some friends had reported that they thought that Anita was possibly starting to kind of see another man that worked at the hospital in a romantic kind of way. And so police then also have said that they received an anonymous tip that they should question John because he looked like a pretty solid suspect. So police do what police do, and they interviewed John. They asked him all the, typical questions, right? How long did you know each other? How long were you married? And then they kind of got into the separation. And through most of this conversation, John, he handled it pretty well, and he was forthright about everything. They asked him for his whereabouts around the time she went missing, and he talked about how he had dinner with his dad that evening and what he had been doing. And he said despite being separated that he and Anita had plans to reconcile. But of course, this was something that, maybe that's how he saw it, but maybe that's not how she saw it. And so then finally the police got to the point where they just flat out said, did you kill her? Now, John claims that at this point in the interrogation or interview, things kind of took a turn and they really started to put the screws to him. They say that he says that they pushed him against a wall and were just being a little overly aggressive in their tactics. And ultimately, he said in just, being almost coerced, "Yep, I did it, must have."
This is why you don't talk to the police.
I don't know if they have the Fifth Amendment in Australia, but if they
not,
do,
they need to get one.
If they do, you should take advantage of it, right? But to the investigators' credit, after they got the autopsy report back, which is it's right around the same time as all this is going down, they widened their focus again. They kind of took a step back from just focusing in on John, because the report made it clear that she was murdered late Sunday evening, which would have made it difficult for John given his dinner plans with his dad, and there was more likely than not, there had been more than one killer. So what happened to Anita looked less like a targeted killing based on the autopsy from a single scorned lover, and more like something awful, unimaginable, involving multiple people. The New South Wales government posted a $50,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest. Adjusted for today's money in U.S. currency, I think that's roughly about like $150,000 or more. So this is a significant reward that the government's offering. On February 5th, a rookie police officer who went to school with Anita was going through the station's call sheets. This is kind of a typical process for investigators, just trying to piece together and figure out, is there anything that we already have that we just need to look at to kind of get more information about this crime that's happened. And there had been a boy who had called and said that he and his sister saw a woman being forced into a car. The police had responded to the call, but they didn't see the car or anything suspicious when they did. So the officer forwarded this information to the detectives who were working Anita's case, and the detectives followed up. The witness was a boy who was 13 and his sister was 14, so they were pretty young, but they told detectives that they had seen this dark-haired woman being forced into a car. At that point, it was actually the sister who'd seen it first, and she yelled for her brother, and the 13-year-old boy actually ran outside to try to stop it, which I thought was pretty...
Right? You go on, and nowadays they'd just be pulling out the phone or recording it.
Yeah, they'd be Snapchatting it or whatever. The kids described this car as sort of a dirty white sedan that maybe had a grayish bottom.
That sounds like me.
Yeah, it's
Dirty white with a gray bottom, or, gray with a dirty bottom, whatever.
same thing. Now, these witnesses, the two kids, they had an older brother who had come home not too long after this happened with his girlfriend, and they told him about it. And so he and his girlfriend actually went out looking for the car that his siblings had seen, which, again, like, credit to these people. I'm like you. I think most people, I mean, the farmer here screaming in his field and's like, this is kids being kids. But these people were like, wait a second, somebody needs to do something.
Yeah, they didn't just rush to, make a post in their neighborhood Facebook group.
Right. So given where they live, and probably the fact, remember, this is an older teenage boy who just came home with his girlfriend. So they drive out to Reen Road, and they actually see a white sedan, and they walk up to it, but they don't see anything suspicious going on in the car or about the car.
So at this point, police have an idea where Anita might have been abducted from and a description of this dirty bottom car.
Right. And so things are starting to kind of come into focus a little bit. But the case really takes a turn after something unexpected happens. People are already upset about Anita's murder. I mean, it's major news, right? And it's understandable. You have this lovely young woman, a beauty queen, a nurse, and she turns up dead with seemingly no clear reason for it. But at 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday, February 7th, the case would go to another level. It would take on, it just went bananas. Radio host John Laws, who's this popular host down there, he managed somehow to get a copy of the leaked autopsy report, and he read it on the air. This is when people lost their minds because they heard all the details of everything that had happened to Anita Cobby.
That is kind of wild that a radio DJ read the autopsy on the air, especially in this time. Radio was very popular.
Right.
Now we've got all these different streaming services and satellites and all this kind of jazz. But, it was radio and TV. And if you were anywhere but in your house, radio was how you... So I'm really surprised that he read that. But if it's this bad, trigger warning, folks. If you are going to be upset by horrific things, this might be the time to bow out.
Yeah. It's really bad. We'll just leave it at that. So John Laws read on the radio from the autopsy report about Anita's injuries and what had happened to her. And essentially the conclusions, without me going into it verbatim, were that Anita had been sexually assaulted in every way possible, and repeatedly and in various ways, that she had bruises about her head and entire body, that she had a sizable bruise over her right eye, lacerations to her back, legs, thighs, breasts, left shoulder, upper arms, and it appeared that her breasts had been particularly targeted. It looked like she had also been dragged over the paddock's barbed wire fence. Both shoulders were broken or dislocated. 2 fingers on her right hand had been smashed. 3 other fingers had been almost severed. Her throat had been slit. She had multiple minor and major lacerations to her neck. Her trachea had been severed, and she was nearly decapitated.
That is horrible. I see why they said they were looking for potentially multiple people involved, because that's just a tremendous amount of damage and injuries to one person, and it would take just a horrific monster and a lot of time probably to accomplish all of that devastation.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And so, as you can imagine, he reads this out on the radio, and people are absolutely up in arms. They are fired up on a new level, because now it's not just that somebody has murdered this woman, which is sort of, to that point, that was what they knew. They knew that this, this fine young lady who had no reason at all in the world to be murdered had been murdered, and that was enough that they were upset. But now, in addition to that, they find out how horrific the last hours of her life had been, and so were...
Some of those listeners probably had no clue about anything. Mm-hmm. They just finished their cornflakes, and they're heading off, turn on the radio in the car to listen to, the weather and traffic or crop report or whatever, and all of a sudden their ears get assaulted with this depravity.
Yeah. They just got done dropping off little Johnny at school, and then this is what you got.
That would definitely make you, especially, I'm not saying like even true crime people who this offends me, but you're just a normal person, not like us, and you hear that the details of all this that happened that you'd never even hear on the news. Yeah, I can imagine that would just incite a lot of anger in the community.
Yeah, exactly. Now, on February 10th, 1986, Anita's funeral was held. Her parents, is reported that they actually managed to keep it together throughout the funeral, but John was a mess, and he completely fell apart. And through losing Anita, I mean, he pretty rapidly turned to alcohol and drugs to try to deal with it and get through things. And the funeral, he really struggled. During the service, in fact, he had yelled,
"Don't take her away from me, please, don't take her away,"
and had to be escorted outside. It was really bad. The following day, on February 11th, police had their first real major breakthrough when a random member of the public called to say that he represented 4 citizens who had information about the murder, but they were too frightened to come forward and talk about it. The man met with police and told them that a guy named John Travers and 2 other criminals, Mick Murdoch and Les Murphy, had stolen a car a couple days before the murder and had resprayed it gray. They had even replaced the wheels. The 3 men who were linked to the stolen car, this white HT Holden Kingswood, you know anything about those?
Never heard of it.
Okay, so it turns out these are made by GM, but it's like the Australia version of GM. So there's your car fact for the day.
Oh, okay.
So the 3 guys who were linked to this stolen Kingswood were Jonathan Travers, Mick Murdoch, and Les Murphy. And this wasn't the first time that police had heard about Travers. There had been an anonymous tip to look into him earlier in the investigation. And it's not surprising why there would have been, because Travers, although he was only 18, police already believed that he had been responsible for the rape of at least a dozen men and women.
Oh, wow.
He'd been in and out of institutions from the time he was 12. He'd already been arrested for using marijuana, and he was an alcoholic by the time he was 14. And he really just did whatever he wanted. He was the definition of a juvenile delinquent.
He was already an alcoholic by 14. Sounds like an overachiever.
Right. Now, he was the oldest of 7 kids, and he was raised in this working-class suburb of Mount Druitt in Sydney's Outer West. Now, there's lots of hardworking people there, but the suburb also had one of the highest unemployment rates. It was also among one of the top 5 suburbs for house break-ins and drug abuse. His dad was a bus driver and had walked out on his mom, and his mom was so upset by this and couldn't cope with it that, and this was interesting to me, she more or less basically ate her feelings to the point of being hospitalized due to medical issues from her size and inability to even care for herself. Basic things like using the toilet and showering and whatever.
Oh, damn. So she's the dango that ate the baby?
Maybe. I mean, it's possible.
I mean, she's got these 7 kids, and she's just falling apart herself.
Yeah, right. And so there's no way she's taking care of the kids, and so that just all falls on Travers to feed his siblings. But remember, he's spending welfare checks on alcohol, so in order to provide food, he just stole it. Makes sense, right? The Travers household was filled with doom and despair.
I mean, it sounds horrible, but it doesn't give you a license to go become a serial rapist.
Well, I mean, amen. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about Travers and some of the things he liked, drinking and stealing food, but there were other things he enjoyed, like tattoos. He had a number of them, including one on his penis. And, Bob, hold on to your seat, he also enjoyed killing animals.
Well, I mean, there's your red flag number 1 through 10.
There's a lot wrong with this guy. And remember, he's 18. Like, he's not some 35-year-old hardened criminal who's already accomplished all this nasty stuff. Like, 18. So just keep that.
He's on the advanced path to being a bag of shit.
Yeah, exactly. So he would butcher chickens and pigs that he stole and then dress them for his family's table. So that's not so bad, right? He's, taking care of the family, feeding them, whatever. He learned to do this while he had a brief stint working at a local meat plant. But that wasn't the only thing he liked doing to the animals. He also enjoyed having sex with them.
Oh, get out of here.
It's going to get worse. Many people had been witness to Travers having intercourse with sheep, pigs, goats, chickens, and lambs. There's a well-circulated story in almost everything that I've looked at about this case that on his 18th birthday, he actually sodomized a sheep and then slit the animal's throat as he finished with it, and then roasted the animal and ate it when he was done.
That is so disgusting and so disturbing.
Yeah.
Like, that guy needs to be locked up somewhere, like, just for that.
I don't disagree at all. And as if all that isn't horrible enough, Travers, during one of the rapes he committed, supposedly told a young man while he was raping him,
I hate you for making me read this shit. All right, here goes. Buck, you bastard, buck, or I'll slit your throat.
"But you do it so well, Bob." There was no Australian accent with that.
No, I can't even do an Australian accent because that's just so disgusting.
By the way, and I'm not that part. I'm laughing at Bob getting mad at me for making him read stuff. That part is awful. It's terrible. But will you guys please let us know what you think of Bob's Australian accent? Hit us up in comments on social media or something. I'm interested to hear what everybody thinks. But so at long last, the police finally thought and really felt like they were on the right track in this case. And you can see why, right? Travers, I mean, like you said, the dude should have been locked up for any one of the crazy, insane, awful, sadistic things that he had already done. And so it wouldn't be a surprise that he'd be involved in something like Anita's murder. Now, the officers who were investigating the case, they sort of discreetly started looking into Travers, the places that he would go and where he was known to hang out. And they told nobody about the lead because they were afraid that Travers and the other dudes that he was hanging out with, kind of known as his gang, might get wind of it and would disappear. And because they had done this before. Previously, they had been wanted for questioning related to rapes or other crimes, thefts, and things like that. And as soon as they found out, they would just dip off to another part of Australia. So the officers knew they needed more information, and they didn't want to tip them off. At this point in the investigation, the government had actually doubled that reward. So now we're up to $100,000, which would be, probably a few $100,000 US in today's economy. And with this carrot sort of being thrown out there, an informant came to light with some addresses where John Travers might be. So in a raid that occurred around dawn in a house in nearby Wentworthville, police found John Travers and Mick Murdoch in bed together. And they admitted that they'd stole the car, but they denied any knowledge of the murder of Anita Cobby. Police found a bloodstained sheath knife that belonged to Travers, and they asked him what the bloodstains were from. And Travers said, and this is believable given his past, that he had used it to slaughter a sheep. At the same time that Travers and Murdoch were arrested, police also picked up Les Murphy in another raid on a house in Doonside, about 3 kilometers away. On Les Murphy's Holden station wagon were these different wheels, these mag wheels and sheepskin seat covers that had been taken off of the stolen car. So remember, they swapped those out, but not being that bright, they used the ones from the stolen car on their own car.
Right.
So Murphy admitted, again, being involved in stealing the car, but he also denied any involvement in in Anita's death. So Les Murphy and Mick Murdoch were charged with car theft and then just released on bail. But police did this somewhat strategically, I think. They wanted to tail them, hoping that maybe they would lead them to the stolen car. After all, that was probably going to be the most vital piece of evidence because it was likely to provide fingerprints and blood samples, maybe clothing that the police needed to be able to tie this abduction that those kids had witnessed around Newton Road to the murder and this Travers gang. But Travers, and you can understand, right? He was held on suspicion of having committed numerous sex offenses in the area. So because of all these other crimes he had been investigated for and believed to do, they were able to hold him. And I can't, obviously they don't want to let him go.
That guy needs to be in custody behind bars. But I can totally understand, giving these guys a little bit of leash, these other two, so that maybe you can get that car that's gonna seal everything up.
Right. And so one of those sex crimes involved the rape of a young girl at a place that looks like Toongabbie. I'm probably saying that wrong, and I'm sorry, but this had happened about 8 months before. And so with all that, they have all this reason they're able to hold him, and they grill him about Anita's murder, but he admitted nothing. So police knew that without that stolen car, without a confession, they really didn't have a case. Then Travers asked if he could have a visitor. He gave police the number of somebody that's consistently referred to as Miss X. a woman he had confided in about the rape of a boy in Perth some months earlier. So when detectives called Miss X and told her that Travers wanted her to bring some cigarettes, she told the detective exactly what he wanted to hear. She had a lot of information to tell the police about John Travers, and they arranged to meet in a public place that afternoon. When they met, Miss X, who was a former heroin addict, explained that she was terrified of being caught talking to the police. And, gee, I wonder why. Even though Travers was in custody, she still was afraid for her life and what he might do to her if she spoke to them. Still, she told them about this rape that occurred in Western Australia and of another rape that Travers had told her about. She said that in both cases, Travers had talked about using this knife on his victims in a manner that seemed eerily similar to the one that was used on Anita Cobby. There was no doubt in Miss X's mind that John Travers was the guy who did this, and so she agreed to help the police to try to catch Travers and prove that he did it.
Oh, hey, why not? I mean, if he's confessing other crimes to her, maybe he'll talk about this one.
Exactly. So she would ask him if he knew anything about the murder and then tell the police what he said. So the following morning, she arrived at the jail with cigarettes for Travers, and the two were left in this private area for about half an hour. When she returned to the muster room, she was pale and distraught and shaking like a leaf. She collapsed in tears and told the investigators that Travers had just told her that he had murdered Anita. Miss X made a statement about what Travers had said and then agreed to visit him again the following morning, but this time she would be fitted with a tape recorder.
What? Why didn't you have a...
Go ahead, say it, because I thought the same thing.
Why wasn't the first conversation recorded?
I literally, I have no idea. I'm like, if you're...
He's in custody, so you have the whole facility to set up however you want.
Right.
And you can put a wire on her without fear of him finding it, because...
He's behind bars and she's... or whatever, right. Yeah. Or
there's
you're right
guards
there.
right there, yeah.
Exactly. Bob, I thought the exact same thing. I was like, wait. So they're making her go back and be like, hey, can you say all that again? But this time, Can you say it into the microphone? But lo and behold, Travers, as sick as he was, wasn't that smart. So they fitted her up, and my understanding was they got her fitted with a tape recorder, and they hid the microphone kind of in between, like old school movies, right? So
right.
They fitted her up in between the gals. They sent her back in, and Travers told her everything. He boasted about how how they had grabbed Anita Cobby, how they had raped and bashed her until Travers finally cut her throat. Miss X found it difficult to contain her emotion listening to what he told her they had done on the night of February 2nd. Now, with all this information now having Travers said what he said, police had no trouble in rounding up Mick Murdoch and Les Murphy. They'd been keeping tabs on them, remember, tailing them and seeing where they were going since they'd been let out on bail. Murdoch was at home, and Les Murphy was found hiding between two women under a blanket, and one of them was pregnant.
Huh. That's an interesting hiding place.
You can't make it up, man. Murdoch and Murphy cried and blamed John Travers as they confessed to police. Travers was dragged out of his cell, and in light of the allegations made against him by Murdoch and Les Murphy, he made a confession in which he named everybody involved. He made no attempt to deny that he was the one who actually killed Anita Cobby. In fact, he was proud of it. Police informed the media that three men had been charged with the abduction and murder of Anita Cobby. Hundreds of people turned up at the Blacktown police station, and they were upset. And upset is like the kindest word I can use. I mean, this is like lynch mob to the extreme. In fact, the reports say that there were actually people who brought ropes at this point, and they were letting their opinions be known about what should happen to these men.
I don't disagree with them.
Yeah, so you want to say what they were yelling?
Hang the bastards! Give them to us for a minute!
Yeah, so this mob, I mean, they are furious, and at this point, like, they're just like, well, what are we waiting for? Let's just hang them. There's no point in keeping them around. And so as the criminals were driven from the police station to be formally charged at a local court, people actually spat on the cars and called for the prisoners to show their faces. When the three cars had left for the court, there was applause and cheers for the police. It had been 22 days since Anita Cobby had been murdered, so relatively it was a pretty swift investigation given everything that had transpired. And Just you think about this back then too, right? This is the late 80s. We're not, DNA, cameras, all that stuff. I think in that time period to solve a case like this that quickly is pretty,
Sure, yeah.
They did a good job. But now there were two other men that needed to be gotten. The hunt was on for Gary and Mick Murphy. The newspapers published descriptions and photos of these men and warned the public they were extremely dangerous and not to be approached under any circumstances. People, leads poured in, police followed all of them, and eventually a man called to say that the two men there were two men who fit the description of these Murphy brothers, and they were living in this townhouse next to him. So police then concentrated their efforts on this area, this block of townhouses. They surrounded the block and waited, and when a woman came out, police grabbed her when she was out of sight of the building, and she told them that the Murphy brothers had been there during the day but had left. The police did not believe her, and so they decided to go in. Police smashed the door to the townhouse, and they arrested Mick and Gary Murphy. Mick was sitting down watching TV and offered no resistance. Gary, on the other hand, ran into a wall of police as he tried to flee out the back door. One of the pursuing officers tackled him, and the pair went sliding into a fence, scratching his face. Gary's face, that is. He would later claim that the police bashed him, even though that's not what happened. And Gary was so frightened that he actually peed his pants, and there's a pretty famous picture, we'll include it in social media, of him in handcuffs being walked away, and he is very clearly Billy Madison style peed himself. I showed it to you earlier.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, he's such a badass now, isn't he?
Yeah.
So is this an episode of Brothers in Crime talking about other brothers in crime?
Sure is. We got 3 of them this time.
Oh, okay.
And so the brothers were taken back to Blacktown Police Station, charged with the murder of Anita Cobby, and word of the arrest spread like wildfire. Of course, everybody is fully engulfed by this case, and another angry crowd gathers outside the police station calling for blood. I mean, it's just crazy. As many as 1,500 people blocked the streets around the station waiting for a glimpse of the killers. Around 9 a.m., the Murphy brothers were formally charged down in court, and an armed tactical response group police manned all the vantage points in this case, just in case the mob took matters into their own hands. So, I mean, there was serious concern that this mob might actually, just mob justice, and that's the end of it. Which, given what happened in this case, I get it. Fast forward a little bit to the hearing, and in spite of confessions and overwhelming evidence, all of these men had decided to plead not guilty. Their trial was held in March of 1987, and it started already it was off the chain. Minutes before the proceedings began, John Travers decided to change his plea to guilty. He admitted that he was the one who murdered Anita, and he would take what was coming to him.
I mean, he's already admitted it, and everybody else, like 4 other co-conspirators, have implicated him in it. Come on.
Yeah, so the following morning, there was yet another sensation when the trial was aborted after a leading newspaper published the fact that Mick Murphy was an escapee at the time of the murder. It was decided that the suggestion that he had been in jail and had a criminal record might prejudice the jury and deny him a fair trial. So the jury was dismissed, and a new trial date was set down for the next week.
Oh, come on.
I knew you'd feel some kind of way about that. Lawyers, right?
So even in Australia, lawyers are lawyers.
That's right, even in the land down under. During their 54-day trial, the jury heard evidence from dozens of witnesses, but it was the words of the accused men and their own records from their interviews that would be their undoing. Although each statement kind of varied from one another, they were unified in 3 things: that the police had beaten statements out of them and that they were forced to sign them under threat of death, that their individual part in the crime was minimal, and it was the others who committed the atrocities. And
always is.
Right, and ultimately, John was the one who cut Anita's throat. So this was sort of their theory of the case, right? This is what they were sticking to. But from the 5 statements of the accused, the jury heard what really happened on that awful night, Sunday, February 2nd, 1986. Travers and his gang had spent most of that afternoon and evening drinking at this hotel in Doonside. They were all basically drunk. And they decided they were going to go for a drive in the car that they had stolen earlier in the week. And they thought, well, we'll just steal some lady's purse for gas money because they needed gas money because they'd spent it all on booze. So then they see this one lone woman walking down Newton Road with her bag slung over her shoulder and decide she is the perfect target. They stop the car in front of Anita, and Travers and Mick Murdoch jump out and they drag her into the car. They told police later that there was no particular reason for choosing Anita.
She just happened to be there at the time, and John wanted her.
Within seconds of being in the car, Anita was ordered to take her clothes off, but she refused. She repeatedly told the men, "Leave me alone, I'm married." Travers and Murdoch started ripping her clothes off, and they were punching her in her face and on the back of her head. Les Murphy leaned over from the front seat, and he punched Anita in the face while Michael Murphy slapped her. Anita, she put up as much of a struggle as she could, but the reality was she just stood no chance against these 5 men. They held her nude and hostage on the floor of the back of the car while they pulled into a gas station to go ahead and get gas with money that they stole from her purse. And then on the way from that gas station to Reen Road, Travers and Mick Murphy raped Anita at knife point in the backseat while the others looked through her purse. Halfway down Reen Road, they stopped the car and threw their naked victim, Anita, into a ditch where John Travers, Gary Murphy, and Les Murphy each took turns raping her. Gary then forced Anita to perform oral sex on him. The 5 men picked the semi-conscious Anita up and dragged her through that barbed wire fence, causing horrific, long, deep cuts to her flesh. At this point, she's sobbing and could offer little resistance. She'd been so badly battered and kicked that she could hardly walk. The gang carried and dragged her to the middle of this cow paddock where they threw her to the ground, and she begged for them to let her go, but as she did, Mick Murdoch raped her again while Michael Murphy forced her to have oral sex with him. And after they finished, Les Murphy sodomized Anita. While Travers raped her again, Gary Murphy and Mick Murphy tried to force Anita to have oral sex with them, both at the same time, but neither of them could get erections. And then Michael Murphy went berserk and raped, bashed, and kicked Anita until she just laid on the ground, barely conscious, hardly breathing, only in gasps. Les Murphy gave Anita one final kick in the head before they all decided that they had had enough. They left their victim there in a cow field and headed back to the car. But Travers wasn't happy. He claimed that Anita would be able to recognize all of them and that she had heard them call each other by name. She had to die, according to Travers, who said,
"I'm going to go back and kill her. She'll never live to give us up. I'll slit her throat."
Rather than try to stop him, the gang urged Travers on. Not needing much encouragement, Travers returned to Anita, sat on her back, lifted her head by her hair, and cut her throat. It was just like what he had done to the sheep in his own backyard. In his statement, Travers recalled that he thought he had cut Anita's throat twice, and the forensics, the autopsy report indicated that he had. Travers left Anita Cobby lying semi-conscious in the paddock, bleeding to death with her head almost severed from her body. When Travers returned to the car, he was covered in Anita's blood and boasted about what he had done. In Mick's statement, he had said he asked Travers what it was like to kill someone, and Travers replied,
"It didn't feel like nothing. It didn't feel anything at all."
They decided they'd go back to Travers' mom's house and clean up. During the trip that wasn't very far, Travers went into great detail about the killing. They all laughed and told him how clever he was. Not one of these murderers had a twinge of conscience about what they had done. Rather, they just joked about what they'd done that night until they reached his mom's house. Travers explained away the blood when his mom asked by saying that the blood on his clothes was from a dog that they had killed because the dog had barked at them.
Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no. And the mother didn't whoop his ass right then and there? I mean, like, that's okay?
I knew you guys had something to say about that.
Don't get me wrong. What they did to this girl is horrible, and all these bags of shit, there ain't a punishment good enough for them. But your alibi for blood is a dog barked at me, so I killed the dog, and mom says that's cool? Come on.
Yeah. So Mick Murdoch gathered up all of Anita's belongings from the car, And the gang stood around and they continued drinking beer while they burned the evidence in the backyard. 5 days later, they took this stolen car to a deserted clearing in like a bush area, and they set it on fire. Now, in these unsworn statements, Gary, Les, and Mick all sort of minimized their involvement in the last hour in the life of Anita. They tried to blame each other, and they said that the police had kind of coerced these confessions out of them. But once Travers admitted his guilt, each of them tried to unload as much of the blame onto him as possible. So Gary claimed that he wasn't even there that night. He was drinking with friends, but he just couldn't remember exactly where. Les Murphy broke down and cried and asked God to help make the jury believe that he didn't bash and rape Anita. Michael Murphy claimed that he only went along for the ride and that he was the only one who tried to stop them from dragging her into the car. At one stage, Michael cried out,
"I'm innocent. This is giving me the shits."
Mick Murdoch claimed that he was shocked by the whole affair, and he sat in the car and played no part. But, as you can imagine, the jury wasn't having any of that. On June 10th, 1987, the jury returned a guilty verdict for all four men after a 9-hour deliberation. Mick Murdoch and the three Murphy brothers showed little emotion as they were led from the court. Now, the week between their conviction and sentencing was not a good one for this gang. See, convicts, they don't like this kind of behavior. And even in prison, there is a code among men. Child molesters, and we've talked about this before, child molesters and, packs of guys who gang rape and murder young women are kind of on the top of that list of, what'd you call them?
Bags of shit.
So, apparently in Australia, they're also referred to as rock spiders. I don't really know what that means. Somebody can let us know. But I'm guessing it's not good. Every single one of Travers' gang was attacked and beaten by other prisoners during this week.
Couldn't have happened to nicer guys.
Right. And then on June 16th, 1987, John Travers and his gang were sentenced in the Supreme Court. Hundreds of people showed up for hours to hear the sentence. And I know I made you read some nasty stuff earlier. And so in consideration of that, I gave you some not nasty stuff to read now. Justice Maxwell, who presided, did nothing to hide his contempt as he addressed the 5 murderers standing before him, saying,
and I can't do this in an Australian accent because you got me too mad at these people now. There's no doubt that apart from the humiliation, the degradation, and terror inflicted upon this young woman, she was the victim of a prolonged and sadistic physical and sexual assault, including repeated sexual assaults anally, orally, and vaginally. This is one of the most, if not the most, horrifying physical and sexual assaults I have encountered in my 40-odd years associated with the law. The crime is exacerbated by the fact that the victim almost certainly was made aware, in the end, of her pending death.
And the court went on to say,
throughout the long trial, the prisoners, albeit to a lesser degree in the case of the prisoner Murdoch, showed no signs of remorse or contrition. Instead, frequently, they were observed to be laughing with one another and were seen snickering behind their hands.
Justice Maxwell then sentenced each man to life imprisonment and added,
the circumstances of the murder of Miss Anita Lorraine Cobby prompt me to recommend that the official files for each prisoner should be clearly marked never to be released. If the executive deems it proper in the future to consider their files, then I would echo the advice proffered in a case in which the facts were not entirely dissimilar by a former and distinguished chief judge at common law, that the executive should grant to the prisoners the same degree of mercy that they bestowed on Anita Lorraine Cobby in the Boiler Paddock Prospect on the night of the 2nd February, 1986. I do not think that the community would expect otherwise.
Michael Murphy died in 2019 after being diagnosed with liver cancer.
Rotten hell, bastard.
Travers, the other Murphy brothers, and Murdoch remain in custody serving their sentences. Travers has tried to escape in the past but was unsuccessful, and they have all been subject to attacks and beatings as a result of their heinous crime.
Good.
In fact, Gary Murphy had to be hospitalized in 2019 for several weeks after being beaten in the shower. He was about 60 years old at the time.
Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Feed his ass to the emus.
Right? So, yeah, why couldn't the dingo eat a dango? Dango? What is it? Dango?
It's dingo, but
dingo.
You got to say in that Australian, the ding
dango
becomes a dang.
Okay.
Dango ate my
so
baby.
I'm just saying they should let the dango eat these guys. So our first Australian case, wow.
Yeah, how did we end up doing an Australia case?
Well, one of our longtime listeners, Jessica, had actually recommended back when we asked for recommendations that we look into this case. And when I looked into it, I mean, it's awful, but this case is sort of one of those cases that I think, I mean, it sounds like anybody in Australia is somewhat familiar with it. It's that kind of case that sort of galvanized and everybody knows about it. It's a flashpoint in their history. And so I just thought we should talk about this case.
Well, it is definitely horrendous, and I appreciate our listener there sending us something in, and it was worth talking about. And if we're not going to be in America, I'm okay with Australia.
I mean, honestly, if it weren't for all the stuff that could kill you there, I could see you moving there. Between the snakes and the spiders and the wombats or what, which, I read that when I was looking for fun facts about Australia, this is totally random. You can turn us off at this point, but I read that wombats, when they poop, it's a cube shape.
Poop cubes. That's interesting.
Yeah, I have no idea if that's true or not, but it was on the internet, so I think that means it has to be true.
Yeah, Jessica, is that true? Is wombat poop cubed?
Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from you. So let us know, guys.
Or any of our other down under Aussie friends.
That's right.
Let us know. And yeah, if you want to stay away from those things that'll kill you, you just go, I'd go live with the Aborigines.
I mean, they seem like peaceful people, but the most I know about the Outback is that they have a really good bloomin' onion. So.
Right. That is awesome. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site and join us for the next episode.